So this video is a course on how to create watercolor textures in Adobe Illustrator. So we will take things from Rhino, make 2D, and do watercolor textures. The beauty of doing a watercolor texture is that it allows the viewer who's seeing your project, it kind of allows them to use their own imagination when they think about the massing. Typically, if you do a hyper-realistic rendering, it becomes very concrete on what your design intent is, what the material is, how people should experience your space visually. But once you start to introduce things like solid colors or watercolors in your visuals, whether they're vignettes or renderings, it gives a little bit of flexibility for the user to envision what they think the massing is. And it kind of helps you just really focus on the narrative of the massing, for example. I'm just going to do a quick overview of how I generate this geometry. This video is primarily, again, going to focus on Adobe Illustrator workflow. And I will toggle back and forth between using Rhino 8 and Rhino 7, but I think maybe moving forward in future videos, I'll just stick to using Rhino 8. If you noticed, just quickly on the user interface for Rhino 8, I went back to the older version layout where the tabs are horizontal, and the same thing with the O-snap, the tabs are horizontal. And so you can easily change that by, if you click on the gear icons over here, it'll ask you if you want a horizontal or vertical layout. And the same thing with the O-snap layout, it'll give you the same option. So it's really up to you if you want to use a new user interface or the older user interface. You can even change the color scheme if you wanted to. But again, that's not the focus of this video. I just don't want people to get too confused about what they're looking at. So to cover this geometry, I'm not going to go into so much detail, but this is actually very simple to create. If I go to one of my side views over here, either front, right, or left, I can do a rectangle from center, and then I just do like a 10 by 10 foot rectangle. And let me just go back to perspective view. I like to work in perspective. You don't have to. And then if I do a P line, I want to make a roof. So if I go here and then snap from mid to mid to mid, basically midpoint, 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 and let's just move this up and just select the whole thing and do a dynamic trim like that. Join this, and now I have a polyline. Again, for modeling basics, I did create a video that goes into detail about basically every command you need to know in design or architecture school. So if you want to, if I'm going too fast here, you can go back to that video and follow along for basic modeling. Again, this is primarily focused for Illustrator workflow. So if I go in here, let me just do move vertical and just move it down to 0. And so if I use the gumball and I use the solid dot, I can create an actual solid extrusion out of it like that. And then if I want to get this kind of asymmetrical roofscape, I can just do move face, right? And press enter. And then it's going to ask me what my direction constraint is. I want to make sure it's normal, so that'll keep it perpendicular to the surface. So I go ahead and just pull that up. And then there you go. And so you get that geometry. And then I can do move face again or scale 1D. It's up to you for this kind of geometry, right? And then I can just mirror, right? And shift it around wherever I like and copy and aggregate. And so that's basically how I created this. I just did a bunch of little roofed massings and then just extruded them and just did move face at different directions and just copied and mirrored them. So I have views already saved, and again, if you type in named view, it'll open up the named view dialog. So I have a couple of views saved. I have a perspective view, an axon view, and then I did another massing perspective view just to show you different options of how to represent this in Adobe Illustrator. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to just make 2D this object. So type in make 2D. And I want to get tangent edges and hidden lines. I don't want the scene silhouette because I want to recreate that in Adobe Illustrator. Definitely viewport rectangle and group output. And you always want to maintain source layers, and you want to get the current view you're looking at. And just do OK. And as I said in other tutorials, I always like to group my make 2Ds immediately as a whole so that if there's any case of overlap. So we have this one here on top view. Let me just move that up. And then let's go to view 5. And again, if you notice, I'm typing my views. I like to name my views short so I can type them and go to them as quickly as possible. So V1, V2, or like perspective view, PV1, PV2, or section SV1, SV2, or things like that. It's easier to type and just toggle to them instead of always clicking on the side over here. So I want to grab this view here. Let me just go ahead and select it and type in V5 again, 2D, just do OK. Again, group it, and let's go back to V2. Make 2D. Okay. Let's group it. Let me just lay these out real fast. Put this one here and put this one here. Okay, great, beautiful. So we're gonna play around with these 3 views on Adobe Illustrator, and we're gonna create a textured and watercolor effect. I'll just select all 3 at the same time, and I'll just do export, and then let me just go to this folder right here, and then we can just call it, let me just call it okay. And then don't worry about these settings, but typically I'll just do snapshot of current view, and I'll maintain CMYK. Well, I'll go back to colors because colors is actually very important in this tutorial. But for now, just keep it CMYK, and you do not need to do export viewport boundary because you already have it on the Make 2D, and just do OK. All right, fantastic. So we're gonna go to Adobe Illustrator and work on the actual part of this video, which is creating watercolors and textured effects on these types of views. Let me go ahead and just update the artboard size. I can do Control R for ruler. I'm going to switch it to inches, and let me just go ahead and edit the artboard to maybe like a tabloid 11 by 17. Great. And then let me go ahead, and it's really important. You see these little bars here, like how that's white and gray and black. I want to make sure that these are actual colors that are not neutrals, because when I select things, you see how it can be white or black. It gets confusing. So I'm going to go ahead and just double click here and just change the colors of these to any color that's just saturated and easy to point out. It does that because it bases it off of your layer color. That's why. Great. Much better. And let me just go ahead and scale all these 3 at the same time. I press E to scale, and then if I hold Alt, it'll scale it proportionally. Just want to get it a nice size. I think that's fine. And then I typically make everything a 0.1 line weight, just everything is thin. And let me just go ahead and give everything a 80% K value, just so we can see what we're looking at. Great, great, great. And then let me just make 2 more artboards. So if I go back to over here for artboards, I can just do new. We make beautiful. And let me take this one, move it over here. Let me take this one, move it over here. Let's take this one, move it over here. Beautiful. So I'm going to turn off the hidden layer, or excuse me, the hidden line layer. So if we go here for hidden, I'm going to turn off the hidden and hidden, just so we see solids. Okay, there are actually 2 methods of creating a watercolor effect on Adobe Illustrator. You could definitely do this in Photoshop, but I try to use as little programs as possible. I do like Adobe Illustrator because it gives me a lot of control over my line weights in a visual manner, but you can do this in Photoshop as well. I'm just going to show you the Adobe Illustrator methods, and there's 2 of them. So let's just do the first one. And so let's work with the perspective in the middle right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm always going to duplicate from the original. So if I go up here and just hold Alt and Shift, I can make a duplicate. So that's number 1. Another thing is that I'm going to make a new layer up here, and I'm just going to call it watercolor samples. You can call it whatever you like. And I want you to pay attention about paste remembers layers. I'm going to toggle this on and off quite a bit. So we have this here. And if you want to activate the watercolor brushes, you just go to your brushes here, and then you go down to your library. And on your artistic, you go to watercolor. And it's going to load up all of these artistic watercolor brushes. And it's really up to you which watercolor brushes that you want to use. If I go to my brush here, paintbrush, right? I'm going to select a watercolor. I typically like to do these bottom 4 and maybe the second one. It's totally up to you what brush style you want to do. So you're going to select a brush style. And then if you notice how the stroke changed, that's going to be the size of the brush. And the color that you get is going to be based on the stroke color. So you see how this is gray? I get this gray watercolor brush. I can go in here, and it's actually important to understand when you work with watercolor, you want to make sure that you are using light tones. You don't want to use heavy, because the reality of watercolors, that watercolors are actually light. And if you use a heavy tone, it's going to look very stark on Adobe Illustrator, and you'll see what I mean. So let's go here, and give me one second. Let me just go to document color mode and change. Okay, this seems okay, great. And let me hold shift. Let's do like a very light magenta. Like let's start off at like a 10% magenta. And if I go here, do you see how that changed? It's hard to see. Let me zoom in. But you see that 10% magenta right there? And it's I think stroke, watercolor stroke 3. But I really like this type of effect. And you know, you're not going to notice the harshness of here if it was a darker color. So I can go ahead and click on this, right? And just increase. You see, once I start increasing the brush stroke, it'll start to change the size of the brush. So I can go ahead, and if you want like a good sense of scale, you can go ahead and just overlap it to see how it's going to look right over there. So if you want to make it smaller, I can just literally scale it down. You wanted to, you can scale it down like that if you wanted to. And obviously the stroke size is going to shrink with it if you have the transform to it. So you can have something like this, you know? So I just like to use this as just as a quick sample to see what I'm working with in terms of stroke density and stroke scale. And you could honestly go ahead and duplicate these if you want to. That's one option. And you can change, like, for example, the stroke type like that, so they don't look completely patterned. You know, I can go ahead and duplicate this right here and change it like this, you know? So you see, I get like 3 different strokes from the same line. Or you can just stick to one stroke and then just go ahead. You know, you can be quite organic with the way you create your strokes. But again, this is not that important in this method. I just want to introduce you to doing the strokes in Adobe Illustrator. So let's just go ahead, and I'm going to pull this aside because this method doesn't really matter about how many you do. You just pull them over here. Let me just duplicate though a couple. Like that, and let me go ahead and change. Just to create some variety. It's great to have variety on here. And I'm just looking, I'm actually looking back and forth as I toggle to see. I think we're fine here. So what I want to do is I want to create about 4 or 5 different shades of this, because I want each elevation to be a different color so that you can read the 3-dimensionality of the massing. You could go ahead and make everything the same color, but then it starts to make it a little too flat. If you just change the shade a little bit, it'll start to make it more 3-dimensional without even needing strokes on the actual massing. So if I go in here and just go ahead and duplicate this, I can increase it by either 10% or 15%. So I can go in here and maybe, so that's 10%, that's 15% there. Might be a little too subtle, so let's just go ahead and do 20%, right? like that. So we jump from this to this. And then I have an option. I can do 25, right? Or I can do 25 and give like a 5K value, you see? So that it gives it a little bit more of a darker tone, even though I'm still in the same 20% range. And let's just do, let's see. And I'll tell you how you could tell how many shades you need. If you go here, right, I have this face. So this is one face right here. And then I have another face here. So that's 1, 2, 3. That's a face, right? And then I have, maybe we can use this face. That's 5. Or excuse me, that's 4, right? And then it's up to you if you want to use this as a different face. So you can have 5 different elevations or different tones of color. So if I go here, so we have 1, 2, 3. I need to go back and change this one. And again, we can make this maybe 10. So that starts to get even darker. Let me pull this down again. And then I can go ahead and let me increase this to 30 and make this 15. That's an option. Or I can make this 40 and make this 5, like that, so that more of the magenta comes out rather than the K value. So we have these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I can turn this into a swatch and I can turn it into a fill afterwards. So again, I love duplicates. I like to duplicate things. So I'll have this here and then I'm going to go in and I'm just going to take this. And if I select this, I can go to my swatches right here, and I can literally take this and drag it into here, and it'll turn it into a swatch. So when I turn this into a swatch, the issue is that there isn't any overlap. So if I go ahead and have this as a fill right now, you see how it's just, there's space and there's gap. Okay, we don't want that. We want there to be overlap. So if I double click on the swatch, I can, you see how it gives me a preview? It's very light, but it gives you this preview. I want to go ahead and make it a brick by row so that it shifts the pattern. And then I can either do size tile by art if I have this checked, or I can just change the size of the actual tile so that it overlaps. I don't want this gap, so I want to make it smaller. So I can go ahead and let's say we can make it like, let's see how it looks like if I do just a 1 by 1. So do you see how the whole thing just overlaps now? And it seems a little too dense right now. We can do, let's try to do 2 by 2, see how that looks. There you go. That's a little bit, there's a little bit more relief there. Let's just see 3 by 3 what happens. As long as there's no, so you see how there's a little bit of gap here now? You may want to avoid that. And let me go ahead. And this is great to see just a quick layout. You can stick to 1 by 1, but it might be more dense. So I just do a 3 by 3. I think that's not bad. I'm just zooming out to see. You want to zoom out and see. Let's try again. Let's try 4 by 4. This is a trial and error. See, now you're starting to notice the gaps, right? So let's stick back to 3 by 3 or even like 2.7. This is getting very specific, but you can do 2.75 by 2.75 if you wanted to. And again, the other method that you could do is size tile to art, where you change the H and V spacing. So it's up to you. And you can name this like watercolor, like, you know, WC1 or, you know, MWC magenta watercolor 1, you know, if it's just easier to understand. And then you click on done. Okay, great. So if I now make a fill out of a rectangle, so let me just go ahead and make no stroke. If I make a fill out of a rectangle with this swatch, let me see, this is what you're going to get. You see? So this is really dense, right? And you can notice all the stroke pattern. We don't want that. We want to maybe like, you know, get maybe like this much of it, right? So if I go in here and do transform and do scale, I want to make sure that scale, stroke, and effects and patterns and transform objects are all checked. You want to do that. And then if I go in, let me just do this. So you see that's really dense, right? But if I take this exact same one and then just scale it up, right? Now, if I go and make a new one, it's going to base it off of the one that you just scaled. So if I go like this, you see, now it's starting to look like more of like a watercolor hatch, which you want, because if you know the scale of what you're working with, you see, it's going to feel like just like one large stroke. And you can sample. So let me just show you. So let's say I make like an empty rectangle with no fill. There's no fill in this. So if you notice, I have this density and this density, this density. So if I click on this and sample it with the letter I on my keyboard, you see I sampled this, more dense, less dense. So you can sample it quickly. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to live paint this. So if I select this whole thing and I press K for live paint, I can just click on it to activate it. So now this is active for live paint. If I just press, the I sample tool, I want this to be the fill. And if I go press K, we can say I want all my faces to be this watercolor face. More like that. And this face, right? And maybe you want it more dense, right? So I can go ahead and just scale this down, right? A little more, and do I and do K again. And now see, it's more dense. So you get that watercolor. So again, we want all sides. So we're going to repeat the exact same thing for each of these. So I'll go in here and select this one, drag it in here, right? And again, you know the settings, so it's much faster now. It's just 2.75 by 2.75, right? So 2.75 by 2.75, and I want it to be brick by row, 3 by 3, and you're done. And again, I can do MWC2. Do done like this. I'm going to fast forward through this probably in the video so that you don't need to see me do this over and over again. Okay, so I went ahead and set up all the swatches. So if we do the next darker tone, which is going to be this one, if I go ahead, I can click on this and I can click on the next one. So that's a little bit darker, you see? And then again, I can press I to sample it, press K, and then I can go here and I want this face here and this face here and this face here, right? So that's that one. And again, I can make it more dense if I wanted to. I can press I, again, sample it again. It's even more dense, you see? And then if we do, for example, this elevation here, so I guess we have these, we can say that we can make these three the same. So let me go ahead and just click on the third swatch. And we can do this one and this and this. So do you see how you get the three tone difference so that you start to notice the dimensionality of this? And then if I go ahead and select the fourth one, you get this, you see? So do you see why lighter tones are better than the darker tones for watercolor? Because then you start to notice a stark contrast. But this also deals with scale. So if you, again, don't like the scale of this, you can always go back and make it smaller and smaller if you want to, because the size of this isn't going to be so large that you're going to notice this visually or even on print. You're going to probably notice it from a distance. So let's go ahead and just do the same thing to this one, just so that we go in here. Again, I'll select this and do K for live paint. So now we have this, right? Okay, let's start with the lighter tone. So I can just go here and sample this if I want to. And let's do K, and maybe we'll do all of these faces lighter. Like this, right? And then we sample this one. And so we can go ahead and make, I guess, all of those faces. Sample I. Again, I'm just pressing the letter I to sample things. And we can do this and this and this and this. And by the way, I can rotate my swatch and it'll sample it for me. Sorry. So like if you don't like this angle, you want the angle to be more, I can change that. So for example, if I make a box, let's just do a rectangle, and let me just sample this, right? So you see how this is going straight like that. I can go ahead and rotate like this, right? And if I sample this eye and go okay, you see how it rotates, and that rotates, and this rotates. So it feels like it's following the stroke. And the same thing here. I mean, this is in perspective, so the angle's always changing, but you can keep it more to the same angle, right? So for example, right here, like, you know how this is going diagonal? Maybe you want it to be more at this angle. Let me just go in, press I to sample that, right? And then let me just go in here. Let's see. Just maybe like that, you know? You just use your eye. You can use your eye. I and then K. There you go. You see how that starts to follow? Very simple things, but it makes a huge difference. And then I think we went, so that's one. I kind of lost track, so excuse me, but I think we've done 1, 2, 3 tones. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, great. So let's do. Let me just do. I may have lost track, so excuse me. That's the only one. Then we have this face. This, and this, and this, and this. And then let me take. I can go ahead and make a new swatch if I wanted to. Like I can grab a new one of these and make a new swatch, or I can just use another contrasting tone if I wanted to. So like I can grab, if I look at these 3, I can grab this one, do something like that. Right? Beautiful. So we have this here. Now there's a couple of tricks that you can play around with in portraying a watercolor. So if you notice how the strokes are white, that's number 1, right? So you have, or excuse me, the strokes are black. If you notice how the strokes are black, it's kind of competing with reading the watercolor edge. So that's number 1. And then number 2 is the background. If I go ahead here, like for example, if I go ahead here and I change the stroke to white, it's going to read completely different. You see, it just reads completely different compared to when you have, because now you're actually reading the watercolor and the shading. That's something that's so important to understand. And it's these small nuances that you should pay attention to when it comes to colors and how colors clash. So let me just undo that so you see the difference. Right here, let me just duplicate this so you can see the difference. Okay, so this one will have a black stroke and this one will have no stroke. There. So do you see how this and this just read completely different? So that's something to keep in mind, number 1. Number 2 is background color. So if you do a background color, that's going to change how this watercolor reads. So let's just go ahead and I'm going to just do a duplicate. Let me get rid of these samples. We don't need them anymore. If I go here and let me duplicate it again. All right, but I'm going to release the clipping mask. I'm going to go to object or it's not clipping mask. I'm going to release the live paint. If I go in here, let me just do shape builder. I'll just select this and just do shape builder over here. I click over here and do shape builder and select this. I think something was open. Let me see, something was open. That's silly. Why would, I don't like that. So here, I'm going to show you another method. That was one method, but I'm not sure why I don't waste time. So I'm going to do a live paint and then I'll expand it. If I go here and just do live paint, Yeah, see, for some reason it includes the gap. So let me just go here, do that. And if I go to Object, Live Paint, Expand, not Release, Expand, and I ungroup this, I don't need this anymore. You see that? I get this, I want this outline here, right? And this is important because this will control how this really is portrayed. So if I go to my layers and I make a new layer and I call it background, and let me just do paste, uncheck paste numbers layers, just cut this and paste it in background layer, okay? And then if I go here and just put it here, there, do you see how this starts to read different now? I can go in here and I just want to do 3 examples of how the color will change the reading of reading the color of the watercolor. So we'll do a dark background. We'll do a light background, right? We can do a monochromatic background. So for example, this background will have a magenta at like the darkest tone, right? We can do a complementary background. So like, blue or a cyan. I'm sorry, I move my keyboard and my mouse frantically sometimes. So if I go here, you see, I can do a nice like pastel yellow. And they all have different readings. Like a yellow like that with a little bit of K in there. I mean, it probably hurts your eyeballs a little bit. And then we can give this a stroke if we wanted to. Like we can make it a white stroke, or that we can have the stroke follow the same color as the background. Okay, so that's the pure watercolor. We can also give this a texture. And so let's say, for example, you want it to be like a little rough texture. Let me go ahead, and what I'll do is let me just take this one and duplicate it here, right? And then I'm going to select it and go to, and actually let me scale it up, transform, scale. Let me scale it up by 200. Just do, okay. I just want it twice as big. And if I can give this a texture, just what I showed you before and after, so again, I'll duplicate it. I go to Effect, and if I do Texture, I can do Texturizer. I like to do if you go down the texture, I like to do the sandstone option. And you see here, this is a good example. So maybe I like to keep the scale small. The relief is up to you. You see, it can be like really, but you lose the color, right? And then if you go here, it's nothing. So if you go and give it a little bit of, it's up to you. Once you start, you might start to lose the change like that, and do okay. And so you see now you get this effect here. So do you see why doing the shading is important? Because now you start to read the differences if you do this effect, right? And so I can go in here and I can make, let me just cut it and make a new layer and call it textured massing. Do Control F. If I do transform, scale, I want to scale it down by 50%, right? So if I take, let's take this background and let's put this one over here. So that's the reading you'll get, right? Again, it's going to read different depending on what color you do. That's an option like this. an option like that. So some people like to do this textured effect to give it. It's just don't mind my screen resolution, but if I exported this as high quality, it'll look great. And I might do that towards the end of the video. But so that's one option of creating these effects with watercolor and texture. Just understand like what you do with the stroke is really important, because like I could technically give this a stroke and make it like a monochromatic option, right? And I can make it a magenta. Now let's see how well one point might be too thick, but let's see. So you could do something like that if you wanted to, but then you start to lose that reading of the edges, you know? Like I think this is a really elegant reading, you know? This is really fine, but even just with no fill, I think it's just really elegant like this. It looks like marble or something like that. And whether you want to do it with a background or not, it's up to you, you know? I like it with the neutrals, but again, it's up to you. So that was one method of doing this. The other method is when you do it with clipping planes and compound, or excuse me, not clipping planes, clipping masks and compound paths. That's the other method of doing it. So if we go here, let's look at this example. I'm going to turn off the hidden layers, turn off this one, delete this, delete this. We have hidden, and let's turn off hidden. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this one. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do, this one's a little bit more intensive because you are kind of specializing how you do the mask. So for example, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click on this and do K for live paint, and then just go ahead and just fill everything in like this, right? So that this whole thing is filled in. I think this part needs to be filled. No, it's so small. Okay. Now, you're going to go ahead and you're going to go to Object, Live Paint, and Expand. And then you're going to do Ungroup. So this is going to help you pull out, you see how it will allow you to pull out just the fill color. After that, you're going to go ahead and pull out each of the faces that you want to do a tone to. So you can ungroup this even more if you wanted to. So if I went in here, I can ungroup it, right? So for example, like, let me go ahead and give this just a stroke color so I can see it just temporarily. Again, the stroke color is just temporary, just to see what I'm working with. So I can like this, so basically this face, this face, this face, and this face are going to be one tone, right? So I have those together, right? And I can do Control G to group it. I'm silly, I forgot one more face, this one. You see, it's a little bit more intensive, and I can group it. And then I know that this face, and let's say this face, and this face is another group. So I can group that. And then these are going to be its own group. Okay. So now we have these three. What we want to do is we want to create something called a compound path. A compound path, first off, the paths need to be closed for each one. They need to be closed. And then what it does is it allows you to make a clipping mask out of multiple paths at the same time. So what I want to do is I'm going to make a completely new layer. And I'm going to type in just compound paths. Now I'm going to take these, Control X, and go in here and do paste in the compound path layer. That's number one. Let me go ahead and just get rid of this. I don't need this stroke anymore. This was just to help me identify. Okay, great. Now the next thing we're going to do is let's work with this one before I go to these two. So if we go here, I can grab the strokes I did here. Like we can grab the lightest one. Let me just duplicate it here. And I want to put this right here like this. And then you'll just duplicate them like this. Duplicate like that, right? Now, if I select this, and if I do, I'm sorry. Let me just lock this. I have to select this first, and I have to go to Object, and do Compound Path, and do Make. Now, if I go here, and select all at the same time, your compound path must, even for clipping masks and compound path masks, they always need to be at the topmost layer. So these need to be above your color that you want to fill it in with. I go in here and I make clipping mask. And so I get that now, you see? So that I can go ahead and take these and just put them over like that, you see? Okay, now going to this. I don't like this division here. I don't like this division here, you know? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select this and I'm gonna go to Pathfinder. There's something called Pathfinder. If I go to Window and go to Pathfinder, there's one called Unite, I think. Yeah, if I go in here, it's gonna unite anything that touches with each other. So it'll like unite this boundary and this boundary is one thing. So I do Unite. You see how it's gone now? It's just one solid piece. Right? The same thing here. You see how you have this and this, right? And you have this and this. I don't want that. I want this to be just one piece. So if I select it and do Unite, there you go. So now this is just one piece. The reason why I'm showing you this method, because I want to show you the other things that you can do with Illustrator, you know? So if I go here now, and again, I can grab another tone. So let me grab like a darker tone that's just way more contrast. I go here. Again, let me just go here like that, and then let me just lock this. I should have just did this first. Go again, Object, Compound Path, Make. Let me do it to this one before I forget again. Object, Compound Path, Make. Okay, so if I go ahead and I select all of these, right? And then again, I want to select inside of this, Make Clipping Mask. There you go. So now we get that. And then let me select another dark. The reason why you do this is that you can have now like more control. If I double click inside of here, I can do Control Y. I can select these and I can be like, okay, I want this to be more like this now, you know? Do Control Y like that. It gives you like live control immediately. So like maybe like particular objects. And let's do the darkest one over here. Duplicate it over here. And just go like that. Push it down. Make clipping mask. There you go. You see? So then we'll just go ahead and take this one. Put that. Oops, I think this goes right here. Like that. And then we take these little guys right here. And if you can't, let me go this anchor right here. There you go. You see? And so again, I personally don't want the outline stroke on there. You don't have to follow that. Maybe you like this like little light outline. It's up to you. I don't, when it comes to watercolors, I like to make it feel like a watercolor that's being shaded. So I can just, let me go ahead and turn this off real quickly and just go here and just turn this off and make it a no fill. Turn this back on. There you go. You see? And so I think that looks very pretty. Let me just scale this up so it's just a little bit bigger. Transform, scale, and let me just do 200 like that, you know? And again, maybe you want this in a different tone than this, right? Maybe you want this in a completely different tone. I can double click on this one, right? And let's say if I do Control Y outline view, it'll show me all of the strokes, which I can go ahead and just select like that. Or I can just select one of them like this and then go here for the filter selection, select same stroke color and select all of them like that. And maybe like instead I want them to be like a different color, right? Like maybe I want all of these to be blues now instead of magentas. You can do that. I'm going to just change it to like cyans, for example, right? If you wanted to do that, it's up to you. There we go. Let me just uncheck this. And this is still here, by the way. If I do Control Y, this is still here. I can go in here. Let me see if the Pathfinder, not the Pathfinder, but the Shape Builder is going to work on this one. Let me just go in here real fast. Let's do Shape Builder. So, nope. So that means there's something open here that's like very small. You can ignore the openings, but let me just go ahead and duplicate it again here. And just select this and do K for Live Paint. And then that's fine. And then let me just fill this in real fast. Like that. And then again, Object, Live Paint, Expand, Ungroup. Ungroup. Let's go right here. And we turn this back on. Let me just cut this and put it in the background layer. And let me scale this up by 200%. Okay, so like one option, I like it with neutrals. Let's see how it looks like with the neutral. Or I can just sample this. That's with the neutral. That's with the black. I should have captured this with more depth here so that you're always reading a solid depth. That's over here, right? I could also make the background one of the watercolors if I wanted to. And then I can texture it. And again, remember, don't forget, so you're seeing a lot of the repetitive pattern here, right? But I can go ahead and scale this up. Right? If I go here, press E to scale it, right? And just sample it again. Click here, sample that, like that, right? And then I can give this a texture if I wanted to. Do effect, texture, texturizer. So I can go on here and see, because the strokes are bigger, you want to probably make the relief stronger. I can also increase the scale. I wanted to. But you don't read like the zebra. So I changed the opacity and made it much lighter. So I want to go over some final exports just to show you the options and how they look after you export them. I typically export these files as either JPEGs or PNGs, but you want to make sure that you have a solid white background from behind, just so that the watercolor or the texture looks flattened. You don't want to do a transparent background because you may interfere with the actual transparency of the watercolor, unless that's something you intentionally want to do. So just keep that in mind. If you look here on this PDF, I have a couple export options. And so obviously this is the first option where you just have a simple white background with a no stroke. All of these actually do not have strokes. And so again, when you do lighter tones, you truly get that watercolor effect. And there's something that you can read immediately about the three-dimensionality of the masking, but it's not completely direct. It's a little vague in some areas. So it's up to you if you want to truly define each face or edge. And so, this is with the black background. And so if you notice right away, there's a huge difference with how you read the color. This is with more of a neutral background, different angle, different color. This is like a monochromatic scheme. This one might be a little bit harder to read with the blue because it looks more like water and ice. Just showing you different color options. Once you start to add background color and like textures and things like that, then things will start to read more. Like if we added a ground plane, for example, things would read even more. That's why I'm showing you examples with like background color. So this is textured. So this is like when I take that in Illustrator, right? And I do the texturizer like you saw earlier in the video. So if you take it and do if you go to, effects and then down to texture and then do like the texturizer, you can get this effect. And I'm doing a sandstone or a canvas effect on here. And again, don't forget, you want to scale these up large and then do the texture effect onto it. But it looks really nice when you do the texture effect on here. So this is, again, a blue option. This is a magenta option. This is a textured with, a subtle tone in the back. Same thing, textured. This last option, it's more so about backgrounds. It's not really about doing something like this, just so you can see, we'll have video like a textured background effect. I actually don't think it's that great. I think things like this, especially something like this, I think is fantastic. I think doing things like this or like this looks great. So I hope you found this helpful. Again, this was more so an exercise of exploring Adobe Illustrator with Rhino and creating a watercolor effect. There's so many options that you can do and play around with. This is an aesthetic that a lot of people like to do nowadays just because it allows people to not, or I guess it gives people the opportunity when they present their designs to allow the viewer to place their own imagination into the design. Because typically, if you do hyper realistic renderings, you are kind of setting a very concrete narrative of how things should look and how things should be experienced visually. But once you start to do things more abstract like this, then you kind of allow the viewer to start to use their own imagination of how they envision the masking. So this is great for like concepts or great for abstracting what materials can be. And people just typically like watercolors, like they just intrinsically, they are drawn to watercolors. And again, don't forget the way you play with your strokes, whether it's a no stroke or the same hue of the stroke or a thicker light stroke, will completely change the reading of the watercolor, and also the background colors that you select will also change the reading of the watercolor. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you have any comments or questions, please leave it in the comment section below.